You will be hearing from my lawyer, you arrogant old fool. That dock is coming down, and I will personally see to it that you are fined into bankruptcy." Those were the words Karen Bishop, president of the Eagle Point Marina Estates Homeowners Association, screeched at me before storming away, her golf cart kicking up gravel like an angry little hornet. It was a threat that should have terrified me. Instead, it was the moment the last gear clicked into place. It was the moment I stopped being a grieving retiree looking for peace and became a structural engineer with a very, very personal project. A year before all this, my life had imploded. Eleanor, my wife of 42 years, lost her fight with cancer. The house we'd built, the life we'd shared, suddenly felt like a museum of a bygone era. Every room echoed with her absence. I was a ghost in my own home, rattling around in a shell of memories. I needed a change, a project, something to anchor me to the present. That's what brought me to Eagle Point. It was a small lakeside community, a collection of modest but well-kept homes circling a placid marina. I bought the smallest cottage, a place at the very end of the main cove. It was unassuming, quiet, and came with a slightly dilapidated but sturdy wooden dock. That dock was the selling point. It was where I planned to restore a classic 1960s Chris-Craft runabout, a project Eleanor and I had always talked about doing together. It was my way of keeping a piece of her with me. For the first few months, it was exactly the sanctuary I'd hoped for. I spent my days sanding mahogany, replacing brass fittings, and listening to the gentle lapping of water against the pilings. The neighbors seemed pleasant enough, offering quiet waves as they passed. I was just Mark, the new guy, the quiet widower fixing up an old boat. I sought nothing more than the hum of my tools and the solace of the water. Then I met Karen Bishop. She arrived one Tuesday morning, unannounced, her electric golf cart whining to a halt on the gravel path beside my cottage. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of lacquered blonde hair and a face permanently pinched in a mask of disapproval. She wore a pastel pink tracksuit that seemed at odds with her severe demeanor. She didn't get out of the cart, just sat there, judging my property from behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. "You must be the new owner," she said. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. I put down my sander and wiped my hands on a rag. "Mark Peterson." "And you are?" "I am Karen Bishop," she announced, as if I should have known. "I am the president of this community's homeowners association." She paused, letting the title hang in the air like a bad smell. "I've been receiving complaints." I glanced around. My lawn was mowed. My trash cans were neatly stored. The cottage, while old, had a fresh coat of paint. Complaints about what? Her gaze shifted to my dock, and her lip curled. "About that structure." "You mean the dock?" I asked, confused. "It came with the house. It's on the property survey." "It's an eyesore, Mr. Peterson," she snapped. "The wood is weathered, and it doesn't conform to the aesthetic standards of Eagle Point. Furthermore, all docks are common property managed by the HOA. You have erected an illegal, private structure on community land." I felt a flicker of annoyance, but I kept my voice even. I was a retired engineer, I dealt in facts and figures, not baseless proclamations. "I can assure you, it's not on community land. I have the deed and the survey from the sale. The property line extends 20 feet into the water, encompassing the dock entirely. It's legally mine." She laughed, a short, sharp bark that held no humor. "The papers you have are irrelevant. The HOA bylaws supersede any private deed. That is a community dock, and you are in violation by using it as your personal workshop. You have 72 hours to remove your boat and all your equipment. We will be scheduling its demolition." My calm began to fray. "You're not demolishing my dock. It's structurally sound, and it's my property." "It is an unapproved modification," she insisted, her voice rising. "And you will be fined. $500 for the initial violation, and $100 for every day it remains." I just stared at her. It was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality, that I couldn't form a coherent response. This woman had materialized out of nowhere and was trying to steal a piece of my property through sheer force of will. "You'll find an official notice of violation in your mailbox," she said, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction. She put the golf cart in reverse. "Welcome to Eagle Point, Mr. Peterson. I suggest you learn the rules. The cart whined away, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust and disbelief. That was my introduction to the HOA tyrant. It was a petty conflict, a ridiculous power play. I thought a simple presentation of legal documents would end it. I had no idea it was the first shovelful of dirt in a war that would consume my life and end with me owning the very ground she stood on. The next day, I walked to the small community clubhouse, which served as the HOA's headquarters. I brought a folder containing my deed, the official county plot map, and the title insurance policy. I was prepared for a rational discussion. I was a fool. Karen was there, sitting behind a large desk like a queen holding court. Two other board members, a nervous-looking man and a woman who mirrored Karen's imperious glare, flanked her. "Mr. Peterson," Karen said, not bothering to look up from her paperwork. "Have you come to pay your fine?" "I've come to clear up a misunderstanding," I said, laying the folder on her desk. "This is the official survey map of my property, Lot 14. As you can see, my property line is clearly delineated. The dock is well within my legal boundaries." She didn't even glance at it. She pushed the folder back towards me with two perfectly manicured fingers. "As I told you, HOA bylaws take precedence. That is all." "Can you show me the bylaw that states that?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "The one that allows the HOA to claim privately deeded property." The nervous man, whose name I later learned was George, shifted uncomfortably. Karen shot him a look that could curdle milk. "We are not obligated to educate you on the rules you agreed to when you purchased your home," she said coldly. "The matter is closed. Pay your fine, or it will escalate." And escalate it did. The fines began arriving daily, sealed in official HOA envelopes. The initial $500 quickly ballooned. Notices were taped to my front door, written in an aggressive red font, accusing me of flagrant disregard for community standards. The harassment became more personal. My morning paper would be missing from the driveway. I'd find small bags of dog waste tossed onto my lawn. When I attended the community barbecue, hoping to speak with other residents, I was met with cold shoulders and suspicious stares. Karen had been busy, painting me as a troublemaker, a hostile outsider who refused to follow the simple, reasonable rules that kept their little paradise pristine. She filed a complaint with the County Code Enforcement Office, claiming my dock was an unsafe and hazardous structure. This, I knew, was a calculated move. It was an attempt to use a legitimate government agency as her personal sledgehammer. The inspector who came out was a young, overworked guy named Miller. He walked the length of the dock, tapping the support posts with a hammer and checking the decking. I stood by, silent, letting my work speak for itself. As an engineer, I had probably over-engineered the repairs I'd already made. The structure was as solid as a block of granite. "Well, Mr. Peterson," Miller said, scratching his head. "I don't know what the complaint was about. This thing is built better than most of the new docks I inspect. The footings are deep, the cross-bracing is textbook. It's perfectly safe." He filed his report, and the county complaint was dismissed. It was a small victory, but it only seemed to infuriate Karen more. She saw my adherence to logic and law not as a defense, but as a direct challenge to her authority. And for a tyrant, there is no greater sin. The turning point, the moment this whole affair shifted from a frustrating nuisance to a personal war, came about a month into the siege. I had to drive into the city for a specialized part for the Chris Crafts engine. I was gone for most of the day. When I returned, I heard the sound of a generator and angry shouting coming from my backyard. I rounded the side of the cottage and froze. Two brutish-looking men in stained overalls were on my dock with a gas-powered circular saw. One of them was cutting through a deck board. My boat, my beautiful, half-restored boat, had been untied and pushed away from the dock, now drifting precariously towards the rocky shoreline. And standing on my lawn, arms crossed, directing the entire operation, was Karen Bishop. A cold rage, unlike anything I had felt since Eleanor's diagnosis, washed over me. It was sharp and clarifying. "Get off my property!" I roared. The sound that came out of me was primal, guttural. The two men stopped, startled. Karen turned, a triumphant smirk on her face. "It's about time you came home. As you can see, we're rectifying your violation. This illegal structure is being removed. You are trespassing, I said, my voice dangerously low. I walked straight towards the men on the dock. You have one chance to pack up your tools and leave before I call the sheriff and have you arrested for criminal destruction of property. One of the men looked uncertainly at Karen. The other one, a thick-necked goon, took a step towards me. Lady hired us to take down a dock. That's what we're gonna do. This is private property, I said, planting my feet. The dock is legally mine. You are committing a felony. Your employer has lied to you. I looked past him, directly at Karen. Call them off, Karen. Right now. Her smirk faltered. She hadn't expected this level of resistance. She thought I was a sad old man she could roll over. They will do as I say, she shrieked. This is HOA property. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I'd like to report 2 men actively destroying my private property at 14 Cove End Road. Yes, they are still here. Their employer, a woman named Karen Bishop, is also on site, directing them. The color drained from Karen's face. The thick-necked worker dropped his saw. The threat of actual legal consequences, of a police cruiser pulling up, was something they hadn't factored in. They were just day laborers, not master criminals. You're bluffing, Karen stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. The sheriff's department is 5 minutes away, I said calmly. You can either be gone when they get here, or you can explain to a deputy why you're cutting apart a man's property without a court order. The 2 men didn't need any more convincing. They grabbed their tools and practically ran to their rusted-out pickup truck. They were gone in 60 seconds. Karen was left standing alone on my lawn, her face a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. She pointed a trembling finger at me. This isn't over, she hissed. You have made a grave mistake. I will bury you in fines and legal fees. I will own this house. Then came the line that sealed her fate. You will be hearing from my lawyer, you arrogant old fool. That dock is coming down, and I will personally see to it that you are fined into bankruptcy. She spun around and stomped back to her golf cart. As I watched her drive away, the rage inside me cooled and hardened into something else. It became a solid, dense core of purpose. She had threatened my home. She had threatened my finances. But worse, she had untied my boat. That boat was my last tangible connection to Eleanor. It was a sanctuary of memory and hope. In her petty quest for power, she had desecrated something sacred. Right then, I decided this was no longer about defending a dock. This was about dismantling an empire. She wanted a war. She was about to get one. But I wouldn't fight with threats and vandalism. I would fight with plat maps, title deeds, and the cold, hard logic of a structural engineer. I would take her down, not with a sledgehammer, but with a finely calibrated instrument of legal and financial ruin. My first step was to turn my home into a fortress of data. I ordered 4 high-resolution, motion-activated security cameras and installed them discreetly. 1 covered the driveway, 1 the front door, and 2 were focused on the dock in my backyard. Every notice she taped to my door, every time her golf cart lingered just a little too long at the end of my drive, it would be documented, time-stamped, and saved to a secure cloud server. Documentation is the foundation of any solid case. Next, I dove into the paperwork. I wasn't just looking at my own deed anymore. I went to the county records office, a place smelling of old paper and quiet dignity, and pulled the files for the entire Eagle Point Marina Estate subdivision. I spent days tracing the lineage of every parcel of land, starting from the original developer in the 1970s. I laid out the huge, crackling plat maps on my dining room table. To a layman, it was a confusing web of lines and numbers. To me, it was a blueprint. I saw the logic, the flow, the structure of how this community was legally assembled. And like any structure, I started looking for the weak points, the hairline fractures, the signs of stress. I found the first one on the 3rd day. It was a small thing, a discrepancy in the legal description of the common area. The developer, a company called Lakeside Ventures Incorporated, had created the HOA and intended to deed all the non-residential property, the roads, the clubhouse grounds, the marina itself, to the association. The transfer documents for the roads and a small park were there, properly filed and recorded. But the document for the marina land was odd. It was a quitclaim deed, a weaker form of transfer, and it had a vague, almost amateurish description of the property boundaries. It referred to the lands adjacent to lots 10 through 20, extending to the mean high water mark. It was sloppy. An engineer would never use such imprecise language. A lawyer would have insisted on exact metes and bounds. This was the hairline crack. I decided to dig deeper. I started cross-referencing the original land grant that Lakeside Ventures had acquired in 1972. It was a single, massive parcel that they had then subdivided. I traced the ownership history of my specific lot, Lot 14. It was one of the first ones sold, back in 1974, to a family named Albright. The deed from Lakeside to the Albrights was crystal clear. It included the land right down to the water, plus the 20 feet of literal rights where the dock now stood. Then I looked at the subsequent sales. Albright to Miller in 1985. Miller to Thompson in 1996. Thompson to me. The chain of title was unbroken. The description of the property never changed. At no point was the land beneath my dock ever severed from the main parcel and transferred to the HOA. My case for owning the dock was legally unassailable. Karen didn't have a leg to stand on. But the sloppy quitclaim deed for the marina still bothered me. It felt wrong. There was a piece missing from the puzzle. So, I expanded my search. I started looking into Lakeside Ventures Incorporated itself. It turned out they went bankrupt in 1978, halfway through the development of Eagle Point. A new company had taken over, but the transition was messy. And that's when I found it. Tucked away in a dusty file of miscellaneous bankruptcy proceedings, I found a motion filed by the court-appointed trustee. The trustee was trying to liquidate all of Lakeside's remaining assets. There was a list of unsold lots, construction equipment, and one other item, described as unassigned riparian parcels associated with the Eagle Point development. My heart started to pound. The trustee, in his haste to close the books on a failed company, had clearly missed the marina land. He had sold off the main lots, but the common areas, the land under the water, the strips between the houses. They were never properly accounted for. The sloppy quitclaim deed to the HOA was likely a last-ditch effort by the failing developers to unload the property, but it was legally insufficient. It had never been properly recorded against the master deed. So if the HOA didn't legally own the marina, who did? According to the arcane principles of property law, when a parent parcel is subdivided, any leftover, unassigned pieces of land, known as gores or remnants, often remain attached to the last parcel sold by the original grantor. Or, in some cases, the first. It varied by state precedent. I frantically searched for the records of sale. Lot 14. My lot. It was the very first parcel Lakeside Ventures had sold off from the master plat. I sat back in my chair, the dusty silence of the records room buzzing in my ears. The implication was so staggering, so monumental, that I had to read it all again. And then a third time. The logic was inescapable. The original developer had failed to properly deed the marina land to anyone. It was an orphan parcel. And according to the legal precedents in my state, orphaned land from a subdivision reverts to the first deeded parcel. It wasn't just my dock. It was all of it. The boat launch. The manicured lawn around the clubhouse. The land the clubhouse itself was sitting on. The parking lot. And every single dock slip that the HOA was leasing to residents for thousands of dollars a year. According to the chain of title, according to the dusty legal history buried in the county archives. I owned the entire marina. The realization didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It settled over me like a slow, dawning sunrise. The foundation of Karen Bishop's entire kingdom, the source of her power and her income, was built on sand. No, it was worse. It was built on my land. For a long moment, I just sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of legal documents. The sheer, beautiful, poetic justice of it was overwhelming. Karen had tried to take my small, humble dock. In doing so, she had inadvertently handed me the keys to her entire empire. My engineer's brain, which had been in overdrive processing data, suddenly switched gears. This was no longer just an investigation, it was the planning phase of a major project. I called it Operation Reclaim. The objective was not simply to declare ownership. That would be chaotic and messy. The objective was to use this knowledge as a lever, to dismantle Karen's reign of terror with surgical precision. I didn't want to be a landlord or a Marina tycoon. I wanted justice. And I wanted peace. The first step was to hire a lawyer. Not some loud, aggressive litigator, but a quiet, methodical expert in property law. I found him in a small, book-lined office downtown. His name was David Chen, a man about my age with a calm demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. I laid out all my research on his conference table. The plat maps, the deeds, the bankruptcy records. He listened patiently for nearly an hour, occasionally nodding or making a small note on a legal pad. He reviewed every document with a meticulousness that I, as an engineer, deeply appreciated. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. He was silent for a full minute. "Well, Mr. Peterson," he finally said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "In 30 years of practicing real estate law, I have never seen anything quite like this. You have, quite literally, found the skeleton key to your community. So I'm not crazy?" I asked. "You're not crazy," he confirmed. "Your research is impeccable. Your conclusion is, from everything I see here, legally sound. The chain of title is broken, and the remnant parcel reverts to Lot 14. Congratulations. It appears you own a marina. So what's the plan?" I asked. "The plan," David said, leaning forward, "is to be the snake in the grass. We don't announce this. We don't send them a letter. We do this quietly and professionally. We file a quiet title action with the Superior Court." He explained that a quiet title action was a lawsuit designed to quiet any competing claims to a piece of property, resulting in a clean, undisputed title for the plaintiff. It was the legal mechanism to get a judge to officially declare me the owner. "We file the suit and serve the HOA," David continued. "My guess is your Karen Bishop is so arrogant, she'll either ignore the summons or pass it to the HOA's probably incompetent lawyer, who will dismiss it as a nuisance. They won't do the deep dive you did. They'll assume their claim is secure. And while they're ignoring it, you continue to be the perfect victim," David said. "You let her harass you. You document everything. You pay the fines, under protest, to avoid a lien, we'll get it all back later. You let her dig her own grave. She thinks she's building a case against you, but all she'll be doing is creating a perfect record of her own malfeasance for the judge to review." The plan was brilliant. It was methodical, patient, and it used Karen's own arrogance as the primary weapon against her. It was an engineer's dream of a strategy. So that's what we did. David filed the quiet title action. A process server delivered the summons to Karen at the clubhouse. According to the server's report, she snatched the papers from his hand and slammed the door in his face. It was exactly the contemptuous reaction we had hoped for. Meanwhile, I continued my life at Eagle Point, but now with a secret sense of purpose. I kept working on my boat. I meticulously catalogued every new violation notice, every passive-aggressive comment, every dirty look. The cameras I'd installed paid for themselves tenfold. I had footage of Karen encouraging her dog to relieve itself on my prize-winning roses. I had audio of her telling another resident that I was a senile old crank who was probably dangerous. She was escalating, just as David predicted. The fines had now reached a ludicrous total of over $50,000. She was plastering notices about my delinquency on the community bulletin board. She was trying to publicly shame me into submission. The final piece of her trap for me, and my trap for her, was the announcement of a special emergency HOA meeting. The agenda was singular, to discuss disciplinary action against the resident of Lot 14, Mark Peterson, including the placement of a permanent lien and foreclosure proceedings. She was going for the kill shot. She wanted to take my house. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday night at the clubhouse. My clubhouse, I thought with a grim smile. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. It seemed every resident of Eagle Point was there, drawn by the scent of drama and blood in the water. I saw a mix of expressions in the crowd. Some looked at me with open hostility, fully indoctrinated by Karen's propaganda. Others looked away, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. They didn't want to get involved. A few, I noticed, gave me small, almost imperceptible nods of support. I wasn't the only one who had suffered under Karen's reign. I walked in with David by my side. His calm, professional presence immediately changed the atmosphere. This wasn't just the crazy old guy from Lot 14 anymore. This was serious. Karen was at the front of the room, seated at a long table with the other board members. She banged a gavel with theatrical force. "This special meeting is now in session," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "The sole purpose of this meeting is to address the continuing and flagrant violations of community bylaws by the resident of Lot 14, Mr. Mark Peterson." She launched into a tirade, listing my supposed crimes. The illegal dock. The unapproved boat restoration. The refusal to pay fines. The hostile attitude towards the board. It was a masterclass in twisting reality. She painted herself as the beleaguered guardian of the community, and me as a villain intent on destroying their peaceful way of life. The total outstanding fines against Mr. Peterson now stand at $52,700, she declared. "The board has shown incredible patience, but our generosity has been met with contempt. Therefore, the board proposes a vote to place a lien on the property at Lot 14 for the full amount, and to authorize our legal counsel to begin foreclosure proceedings immediately." A murmur went through the crowd. This was it. The public execution. All in favor of the motion? Karen asked, her eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to oppose her. Before anyone could raise their hand, David stood up. "Point of order, Madam President," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily through the silent room. Karen glared at him. "Who are you? You are not a resident. You have no standing here." "I am David Chen, legal counsel for Mr. Peterson," he replied smoothly. "And I am advising my client that this entire meeting, and indeed this entire board's authority, may be resting on a foundation of, let's call it, a significant misunderstanding." "What nonsense is this?" Karen sputtered. "This is a private HOA matter." "Is it?" David asked, raising an eyebrow. "My client has instructed me to inform the board and the residents present that a quiet title action, case number 2023 CV 0418, has been filed with the County Superior Court." He paused, letting the legal jargon sink in. Confusion spread across the faces in the crowd. "The purpose of this action," David continued, "is to resolve a serious discrepancy we've discovered in the county property records. A discrepancy which suggests that the land on which this clubhouse is built, the land that constitutes the entire marina, its parking lot, and all of its docks, was never legally transferred to the Eagle Point HOA." The room erupted in whispers. Karen's face went from red to a pasty white. "That's a lie," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "A desperate, pathetic lie. We have the deed. The HOA has owned this land for 40 years. Then you will have no trouble presenting that deed in a court of law," David said, his voice still perfectly level. "However, our extensive title search indicates that the original developer went bankrupt before the transfer was properly executed. Preliminary findings suggest that, due to a failure in the chain of title, ownership of this common land reverted to the first deeded parcel in the subdivision." He turned and gestured towards me. "That would be Lot 14. The property of Mr. Mark Peterson." Complete silence. You could have heard a mooring pin drop. The residents were staring, not at me, but at the floor, at the walls of the clubhouse, as if seeing them for the first time. They were suddenly guests in a building that might not belong to their community. The foundation of their world had just been cracked. Karen stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a fish on a deck. The absolute certainty she had worn like a suit of armor was gone, replaced by a dawning panic. This is preposterous," she finally managed to stammer. You can't just claim you own everything." "We're not claiming anything, Madam President," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was steady. "The public record is. We're simply asking a judge to confirm it. And until that happens, any action you take against my property, including this fraudulent lien, will be viewed as a malicious and retaliatory act. I would advise this board to table its motion indefinitely." The nervous board member, George, looked like he was about to faint. He was staring at Karen, his eyes wide with terror. He knew. He must have known something was wrong with the books, with the paperwork. Karen, cornered and exposed, did what all tyrants do when their power is challenged. She lashed out. "Get out," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me and David. "Get out of our clubhouse. I'm calling the police. You're trespassing. That's a very interesting legal position to take, David said with a thin smile. Calling the police on a man for trespassing on what is, quite possibly, his own property. By all means, make that call. I'm sure the judge will find it very illuminating. She didn't make the call. She just stood there, shaking with impotent rage, as we turned and walked out of the clubhouse. The meeting was over. The vote never happened. I had not only defended my home, I had planted a bomb under hers, and the timer was ticking. The look of fear and uncertainty on the faces of the residents told me everything. Her power was broken. They no longer saw her as an unassailable leader, they saw her as the woman who might have built their community on a lie. The aftermath of the meeting was exactly the kind of chaos we had anticipated. The HOA was paralyzed. All official business ground to a halt as rumors flew. Karen retreated into her home, refusing to speak to anyone, but the damage was done. Her aura of invincibility was shattered. But a cornered animal is a dangerous one. I knew she wouldn't just give up. Her entire identity was tied to her position as the Queen of Eagle Point. Losing that would be a kind of death for her. So I braced myself for the retaliation. It came faster and uglier than even I had expected. A week after the meeting, I was served with a temporary restraining order. In her sworn declaration, Karen had fabricated a story of me threatening her in the parking lot after the meeting. She claimed I had menaced her, that I was a violent and unstable individual, and that she was in fear for her life. It was a complete work of fiction, a disgusting perversion of the legal system designed to protect actual victims. The order stipulated that I had to stay 500 feet away from her and her property, which was conveniently located next to the only road out of the community. It was a tactical move to make my life a living hell. Simultaneously, she launched a smear campaign. A new, anonymous community Facebook page appeared, filled with posts about the dangerous recluse on Lot 14. It hinted at a dark past, questioned my military service, and even stooped to posting a picture of my late wife with a caption wondering what kind of man would disgrace her memory with such behavior. That was the blow that truly hurt. Bringing Eleanor into her filthy little game was a violation that went beyond property or money. It was a desecration. David had to talk me down from marching over to her house right then and there. "This is good for us, Mark," he said, his voice a steadying presence over the phone. "This is desperation. It's the flailing of a drowning woman. We have the camera footage of the parking lot after the meeting. It shows you getting into your car and driving away peacefully. She committed perjury. This is a gift. Just keep documenting." His words were wise, but the emotional toll was mounting. The peace I had come here to find felt further away than ever. I was living in a state of constant siege, my home no longer a sanctuary but a fortified position in a war I never wanted. I started to wonder if it was worth it. Maybe I should just sell the place and disappear. That thought was festering in my mind one evening when my doorbell rang. It was after 9 o'clock, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the camera feed on my phone. Standing on my porch, looking terrified, was George, the nervous HOA treasurer. I opened the door. He was clutching a manila envelope to his chest like a life raft. "Mr. Peterson," he whispered, his eyes darting around as if he expected Karen to pop out of the bushes. Can I come in for a moment?" I led him into the kitchen. He wouldn't sit down. He just stood there, trembling slightly. "She's gone crazy," he said, his voice barely audible. "After that meeting, she started shredding things. Financial records, old meeting minutes, everything. She told me to reconstruct the budget for the last 5 years." "Reconstruct?" I asked. "She wants me to cook the books," George said, his face pale. "Create a new paper trail. She's been using the HOA reserve fund as her personal piggy bank for years. Paying for her car, her vacations, she called them community development expenses. There are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars missing." It all clicked into place. The HOA fees at Eagle Point were unusually high, but the amenities were mediocre. The money had to be going somewhere. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry tyrant, she was a common thief. Her desperation wasn't just about losing her status, it was about staying out of prison. "I can't do it, Mr. Peterson," George continued, his voice cracking. I could lose my accounting license. I could go to jail. I have a family. I tried to reason with her, and she threatened me. She said she'd tell everyone I was her accomplice, that it was all my idea. He held out the manila envelope. These are the originals. The real bank statements and budget reports for the last 3 years. I made copies before she could get to them. I don't know what to do. I took the envelope from his trembling hands. It felt heavy, not with the weight of paper, but with the weight of decision. This was the final piece of the puzzle. This was the evidence that elevated the situation from a civil property dispute to a criminal conspiracy. You did the right thing, George, I told him, my voice firm. You're not going to jail. She is. The next morning, David and I walked into the district attorney's office. We didn't ask for a junior prosecutor. We asked for the head of the Economic Crimes Division. We laid it all out for him. The quiet title action, detailing the fraudulent claim to the Marina. The restraining order, along with the video evidence proving perjury. And finally, the contents of George's manila envelope, a clear and damning trail of embezzlement and fraud. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Harrison, listened intently. He looked from the property maps to the bank statements to the perjured court filing. A grim, hard line formed on his mouth. This woman, he said, tapping the file on Karen Bishop, has used the Homeowners Association as a racketeering enterprise. She's leveraged a fraudulent property claim to extract fees, which she then embezzled for personal gain, and used the court system to harass and intimidate anyone who questioned her. This is not just a civil matter anymore. He assured us they would launch a full investigation immediately. George was granted prosecutorial immunity in exchange for his testimony. The state was now officially involved. The final act was about to begin. The stage for the final showdown was the court hearing for the temporary restraining order Karen had filed against me. She, of course, expected it to be a simple affair where the judge would listen to her tearful, fabricated testimony and make the order permanent. Her lawyer, a smarmy character who seemed completely out of his depth, clearly thought the same. They were not prepared for what was coming. David and I arrived at the courthouse early. The small courtroom was already buzzing. Several residents from Eagle Point were there, including George, who sat in the back, looking pale but resolute. In the front row, 2 stern-looking individuals in plainclothes sat watching. I recognized one of them from the DA's office. They were detectives. Karen swept in, dressed in a somber navy blue suit, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue for effect. She shot me a look of pure venom as she passed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Miles, called the court to order. Karen's lawyer presented their case, painting me as a menacing figure who had left his client terrified. Then, Karen took the stand. She was a consummate actress. Her voice trembled as she recounted the fictional confrontation in the parking lot. She spoke of my bullying and intimidation, of how I was trying to steal the community's assets. With my frivolous lawsuit, she was weaving a narrative of a helpless woman standing up to a powerful, aggressive man. It was masterful and utterly false. When it was David's turn to cross-examine, he was gentle at first. Mr. Peterson is a retired man in his late 60s, is that correct? Yes. And you are claiming this man, who has no history of violence, threatened you so severely you are in fear for your life? Absolutely, Karen said, her voice dripping with manufactured fear. He was red in the face. He said he would ruin me. Interesting, David said. Because we have a video of the parking lot from that evening. Would you like to see it? Karen's lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection. Ambush. Overruled, the judge said, her eyes fixed on David. I'd very much like to see it. Proceed, counselor. David set up a laptop facing the judge and Karen. He played the footage from my security camera. It showed me walking calmly to my car, getting in, and driving away. It showed Karen standing 200 feet away, yelling something unintelligible in my direction. There was no confrontation. No threat. No menace. The courtroom was silent. Karen's face was a stone mask. She had been caught in a blatant lie, under oath. Mr. Bishop, David said, his voice now like ice. You have just committed perjury in a court of law. But I'm afraid that is the least of your problems today. He walked back to our table and picked up a thick binder. Your Honor, the issue of this restraining order is a symptom of a much larger criminal enterprise. We are prepared to present evidence that Mr. Bishop, in her capacity as HOA president, has been systematically embezzling funds from the Eagle Point community for at least 5 years. Karen's lawyer was sputtering, but the judge silenced him with a wave of her hand. Her focus was entirely on David. Furthermore, David continued, the very basis of the HOA's authority, its ownership of the community's common areas, is fraudulent. We have an unbroken chain of title proving that the Marina and all associated properties legally belong to my client, Mr. Peterson. He placed the binder on the judge's bench. And finally, we have evidence that Mr. Bishop, upon learning of our quiet title action, began actively destroying financial records to conceal her crimes. Judge Miles opened the binder. Her eyes scanned the first few pages, the title report, the bank statements George had provided. Her expression grew darker with every page she turned. Karen was no longer acting. The mask was gone. Her face was a terrifying mixture of rage and raw panic. She looked like a trapped animal. Lies, she suddenly shrieked, pointing at me. He's a con man. He faked all of this. He's trying to steal our homes. He and that sniveling little accountant. Her outburst was wild, unhinged. She was incriminating herself, confirming her knowledge of George's role, her mind collapsing under the weight of her own deception. Judge Miles looked up from the binder, her face like thunder. Mr. Bishop, you will be silent or I will have you held in contempt. But Karen was beyond reason. He can't do this. I built that community. It's mine. I am the president. As her meltdown reached its peak, the 2 detectives in the front row stood up. They walked calmly and deliberately towards the witness stand. One of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Karen Bishop, the lead detective said, his voice cutting through her tirade. You are under arrest for embezzlement, grand larceny, perjury, and obstruction of justice. The color completely drained from her face. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on her. The detectives gently but firmly took her by the arms. As they cuffed her, her eyes found mine across the courtroom. The panic was replaced by a look of pure, distilled hatred. You'll pay for this, she screamed, her voice hoarse. I'll destroy you. You hear me? I will destroy you. It was her last, impotent threat. The hollow echo of a tyrant who had just lost her throne. The detectives led her, still shouting, out of the courtroom. Her smarmy lawyer just stood there, his mouth agape, his entire case, and probably his career, in flames. The judge looked at me, then at David. Well, counsel, she said, a hint of a weary smile on her face. I believe we can dismiss this restraining order. And I suspect your quiet title action is going to proceed uncontested. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Karen in jail and the evidence against her overwhelming, the rest of the HOA board folded like a cheap suit. They offered no defense in my quiet title suit. A few weeks later, a judge signed the final decree. Legally, officially, and indisputably, I was the owner of the entire Eagle Point Marina, clubhouse and all. Karen Bishop's fate was sealed in a criminal court. Faced with a mountain of evidence and George's damning testimony, she was convicted on all counts. The judge, citing the calculated, long-term nature of her crimes and her utter lack of remorse, sentenced her to 8 years in state prison. The court also ordered full restitution, forcing the sale of her house and all her assets to repay the money she had stolen from her neighbors. She lost everything, her home, her freedom, her reputation. She was left with nothing but the bitter ashes of her collapsed kingdom. With the legal battles over, I was left with an unexpected problem. I owned a marina. I had residents paying me slip fees. I was responsible for the maintenance of the clubhouse and the boat launch. It was the last thing I ever wanted. A week after the final judgment, I called a community meeting. I held it in the clubhouse, my clubhouse. The mood was entirely different from the last meeting. The fear was gone, replaced by a tentative sense of hope. I stood at the front of the room, not as an outcast, but as the de facto leader of their community. I know you're all worried, I began. You're wondering what happens now. Am I going to raise the fees? Am I going to sell the marina to some big corporation? The answer is no. I held up a single piece of paper. This is a deed. I have had my lawyer draw it up to transfer ownership of the marina, the clubhouse, and all common lands from me to a new, properly constituted Eagle Point Homeowners Association. A wave of relief washed over the room. There are conditions, I added, holding up a hand. First, the new HOA will be run democratically. Term limits for all board members. Complete financial transparency. All meetings will be open, and all records will be available to any resident who asks. Second, the bylaws will be rewritten. We will remove all the petty, vindictive rules about lawn ornaments and the color you can paint your mailbox. The rules will exist only to ensure the safety, structural integrity, and shared enjoyment of our community, not to control people's lives. And third, I said, looking around the room, the price for this transfer of ownership will be $1. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then the room erupted in applause. People were smiling, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some were crying. It was the sound of a community being liberated. In the weeks that followed, we did exactly that. I helped them elect a new board, with George unanimously voted in as the new president. We drafted new, sensible bylaws. And at a small ceremony on the clubhouse lawn, I signed the deed, and for the symbolic payment of a single $1 from George, the marina once again belonged to the community. This time, for real. My life returned to a quiet rhythm. The hateful notices and threats were gone, replaced by friendly waves and plates of cookies left on my porch. People would stop by my dock not to complain, but to admire the progress on the Chriscraft and ask for my advice on their own projects. I was no longer the outsider, I was just Mark, their neighbor. One sunny Saturday afternoon, I was putting the final coat of varnish on the boat's mahogany deck. The restoration was almost complete. It was a beautiful vessel, gleaming in the sun, a testament to patience and dedication. George walked down the dock, holding 2 bottles of cold beer. He wasn't the nervous, frightened man I had first met. He stood taller, more confident. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, handing me a bottle. "Thanks, George," I said, taking a welcome sip. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the peaceful water. The marina was bustling with happy families, the sound of laughter echoing across the cove. It was the idyllic community I had thought I was moving to. "You know," George said, "what you didn't just save me. You saved this whole place. You gave us our homes back." I looked at my boat, the reflection of the water dancing on its polished hull. I thought of Eleanor, and how she would have loved this. I thought of the long, stressful months of fighting, of digging through records, of facing down a bully. "I never wanted to own a marina, George," I said with a smile. "I just wanted to fix my boat. I just wanted to be left alone." He nodded, understanding. "Well, for what it's worth, we're all glad you weren't." He left me to my work. I dipped the brush back into the varnish, the familiar smell filling the air. The water lapped gently against the dock, my dock. The sun was warm on my back. The war was over. The project was complete. I had finally found my peace.